Welcome to another episode of the Inclusive Insights. I'm your host, Neetu Razdan, and we have a truly special episode lined up for you today. We are joined by an exceptional guest, the Undersheriff of San Mateo County, who is not just a law enforcement leader, but also an advocate for inspired leadership and team motivation. Today, we'll delve into the world of leadership philosophy, discussing his thoughts and collaboration with other thought leaders and how these principles translate into inspiring and motivating teams in both law enforcement and corporate environments. But before we dive in, Undersheriff Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. To kick off the things, let's talk about your style of leadership. Is it more adaptive or inspired, or an amalgamation of both?
Mostly, I would hope for inspired, sometimes situational or amalgamation. But I would like to know or operate with the sense that if I'm not in the room, those people that I work with and work for would innately know how I would make a decision. And hopefully that's through inspiration.
Awesome. And what does it really mean outside of, hey, knowing what decisions you make? What else does leadership mean to you and its role in leading teams?
I think it's a lot about creating culture, a culture among a team that fosters safety. And I'm sure we'll talk about later, like creating psychologically safe teams, creating a vibrant culture that encourages people to take responsible chances, to do things that abide by the core values of any organization. We do things for the right reasons, legally, ethically, et cetera. So I think the whole purpose is when you're not in the room, and we all operate in situations where a leader, a boss may not be available, we want to know that people in our team environments can make the right decision that'll benefit not just them, but also the organization.
That's amazing. And I can draw a parallel. I mean, probably we never thought about, think about it, but in corporate or even in startup world, we always aspire to have team members that can actually go and take decisions, right? Be autonomous, but at the same time, be able to take the right decisions, right? So this is great that you're cultivating this sense of accountability, yet be able to take the risk and do the right thing. Amazing. I just love it. Awesome. And my understanding is that you have been collaborating with a lot of thought leaders. You have had the opportunity to contribute and collaborate with a lot of thought leaders, and expand this leadership philosophy. Can you tell us, about those collaborations and how they have influenced your approach to leadership?
Sure. I've spent the past probably decade just really kind of looking and doing a lot of thought into what leadership means, what leadership culture means, mostly in the world of policing, but also I've found, and this is an interesting kind of takeaway, is regardless of our organization, whether in the private sector, public sector, or even in policing, these institutions are all filled with people, with humans.
Mhm.
And so that means human skills like having difficult conversations or leading, and the challenges of leading are relevant across these platforms. In the last couple of years, I've had the honor and the privilege of working with Simon Sinek on a startup that we formed, a startup nonprofit, I should say, called The Curve. And the purpose of The Curve is really to influence and change leadership, police reform from within, from the inside out, from the top down. Happy to answer any questions that you might have on that level as well, because I think there's a lot of takeaways for your audience in the private sector.
Absolutely. And I mean, Simon Sinek is a known name, and you collaborating and forming the curve, I think, is of personal interest to me because I want to understand, what can you tell us about the purpose of the organization? Do you expand beyond the public sector, or is it, my understanding is it's only for police department? I may or may not be right, but I want to know, the parallel. Are you guys, or is Simon bringing in his experience or his understanding from the, private sector into, public services as well? How does it work?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of direct parallels. Clearly, Simon is someone who is well regarded and comes from the private sector. And we're finding on the policing side of the world that so much of what he's teaching applies. So I'm 100% confident that what he's teaching us is 100% applicable to the private sector in your world. I'll give you an example. We talk a lot about culture, right? And a culture
Yeah.
in any organization is either going to permit some sort of behavior or it'll promote some sort of behavior, right? And so in our world, we talk about a culture by design versus a culture by default. And what does this mean? Any company that you have, do the employees know what the company culture, how it became about, what the core values are, where it is in present day, and where it's going to go, right? And so in policing, that parallel means, in a lot of police departments, the culture is not defined. It just kind of happens. And sometimes it's dictated by the media. Sometimes it's dictated by the Hollywood script of police shows. And we start behaving like we think it should be because we saw it on TV, right? So there's that aspect. There's also this aspect of how do you bring about change in any organization? And so if you were to do a Google search on the term Simon Sinek law of diffusion of innovation, you would
Mm-hmm.
see a really great TED Talk ish. I think it's about 8 minutes long, but he talks about this bell curve in any organization. And this is where the name of our startup, our nonprofit came from, is in any curve organization, you will have the beginning of the curve, which is your innovators and your early adopters. The
Mm-hmm.
middle of the curve is your general, the general mass kind of in between people that don't really want to change, or they're not really against or for anything. They just don't like change, right? And then the back side of the curve are your laggards or people who just don't want to do anything, right? And
Yes.
for far too long, I think in a lot of our organizations, we think if we have to bring about a change, we have to convince the middle. And what he's found through his research is no, contrary to that, is identify the early adopters and the innovators of any group. And this can be even in a team setting of like 2, 3, or 4 people. And what you'll find is that you band together, and this is what we did in our effort for police reform, is we found like-minded chiefs and sheriffs from across the country that feel that there was a need and that we need to change the culture. Once you get and band together those early adopters in any organization, I think he says the tipping point is like 13.5%. You only need to convince 13.5% of your team environment before it becomes mass adopted by the middle, right? So it really reframes kind of how we as leaders think about any idea that we're trying to bring about, any shifting of an organization where you want to turn the ship a little bit or a lot. That's kind of the fundamental steps that we would take to bring about that change.
That's amazing. I love it. And it just seems so interesting. And I can stop asking you, give me more examples. Is there anything that you did at Curve that just stuck out? Because sometimes I go to these, events and there is something we do and I'm like, oh, I never tried this before. And it really works. Is there something you have tried in the past with the whole Curve team and you were like, oh my God, I wish I had this before, or I wish everybody could do this with their team?
We did a book club, and I know most of your audience probably knows what a book club is, but in a workplace environment, it's a really interesting opportunity. Um, and I can share with you, like, you have to do it a certain way because if a
Mhm.
leader comes in and creates a book club, there still is that power dynamic of reporting structure. So what we did was when I was the chief at Mountain View Police Department and we created this book club, we were very intentional where there were some ground rules. There's no rank in the room. There's no seniority in the room. There's no role-based authority in the room. We all came together to learn together, right? We even had a virtual swear jar. If you called me by my title, you had to like put $1 in, right? But once you've done that, and once we started to go through a chapter at a time every few weeks and talked about, and we actually used Simon Sinek's Infinite Game for this book club, it was it was really important to set those ground rules because then as a leader, I would come in and say, look, here's where I actually made a mistake. Chapter 2 talks about this type of mistake, and I'll be the first to raise my hand. What that does is it takes me as a leader and it makes it okay culturally to make a mistake, to admit to a mistake in a team environment. Because I always take a step back and go, how many of us have worked for a boss who thought that they were perfect, right? I ask that question when I go and teach, and everyone raises their hand. Who likes working for bosses like that? Nobody,
One.
right? But what happens when you have a boss that comes in and says, you know what, I don't have all the answers, but I see my role as trying to help. And if we make a mistake, we make a mistake together. We'll learn from it, we'll pick up, and we'll keep going, right? And so that's a quick example of how, even in this book club, you create this environment. Now we've gone on this journey and we learn together. I can tell you wholeheartedly that after we finished that book, that working alongside those employees on different problems down the road, it created just a unique, deeper relationship and more respect and trust because we learned, we took a journey together, right? And so I think there's a lot of opportunity there for even your listeners to kind of go down that same path.
Absolutely, I think, and it really works. I mean, I have personally tried it. If you are trying to create a gap between you and your, your team, you'll always be different. I think the whole game is how do you become one of, one of the members of the team versus I'm the boss and you all report to me or you all work for me. Yeah, this is really good food for thought and things that could be real great takeaways. Now, I'm kind of gonna go into the law enforcement angle, just trying to understand how do you apply. First of all, is there a difference between, say, we running a company or we running a startup? Because we have our own stresses, right? Every business with the market condition or what's going on, this and that. How do you guys motivate and inspire your teams, and how do you keep them always like inspired, and go above and beyond Call of Duty? I feel like it's such a tricky spot to be in. You're risking your lives, you're out there protecting all of us, and at the same time, you have to be a normal human being. How do you draw a balance, and how do you, as a leader, help your team think through this?
Great question. So I think from what I understand about like private sector, I would make a generalized statement that maybe your organizations are flatter, right, in terms of more
Mm-hmm.
cross collaboration. That being said, like in a police organization, most of them are paramilitary, so it follows a strict chain of command, right? You have rank, like and sergeants, lieutenants, captains. Now, that being said, we are also, the industry has moved towards being just more collaborative across the board, right? So I'll give you an example, and this time we wear a lot of hats, is if there's an emergency, um, there's no time to, put a team together and collaborate and things like that. So a lot of times officers or deputies that are show up on a first time on the scene, we put a lot of responsibility in for them they are the CEO or the boss at that scene at that moment, right? And so I think that's that takeaway for your industry where sometimes you have the employee or a team, there is a crisis happening, there's no benefit of time because you have to take action. So we train that way and we train people to make those critical decisions. At the same time, we also have to train team environment where it's not an emergency to cross collaborate because even within the policing profession, there's so many different verticals, right? If you want to go into narcotics enforcement, if you want to ride a motorcycle and do traffic enforcement, if you want to work with kids. And so it's so different, but I think it's also very similar to private sector where a success of an organization will depend on how well these groups can respect and talk to each other. So as leaders, what we do is we try to create like you'll hear me say this over and over. A leader's responsibility is to create the culture that allows for these things to happen, right? So if you are a leader that is a control freak and you have to have your fingers in everything and you're so rigid, you, the leader, will actually be the barrier to any sort of innovation. Whereas you take the opposite example of that. If you're a leader that is all about the team and all about the mission or the cause of the organization, and you don't care who gets the limelight or the praise, but you've set up a culture that fosters innovation, outward thinking, and you've made it okay to make a mistake. I guarantee you set that up and now you just take a step back and you let people thrive because everyone will approach a problem and will come up with a solution based on the background that they have come to life with. They've intersected into your company at a certain point and they come with talents. You've already hired them for talent. Now you just got to get out of their way, right? You give them, we have a concept when we, like I spent 13 years on our SWAT team, and there's a concept that's called commander's intent. So imagine, if you will, there's a hostage situation in a building, and now you're commanding this team of 12 SWAT members. Now, if I'm a control freak, I'm going to be telling them, turn right, turn left, go through this door. But I also know that as a leader in the command post a block away, I cannot see the ground truth of what they're going through at the door. So I give them what's called the commander's intent. My commander's intent in this scenario is that you go and you get into the building quietly, but if you get to the point where you have to blow a door down, that you have to report back and get my permission. So you give kind of these broad intentional messages as a leader, but you also have to step back and trust the team leader you put in charge of that to make the decision, do I go right or do I go left? If that makes sense.
It does. It absolutely does. And as you were narrating this, I'm kind of following you, and it feels like as if I'm in that situation. But I can at the same time draw a parallel in my world, like running a team, or just, it could be, on a sales call, or it could be, winning a customer. It could be anything, and you can draw a parallel, give them the commander's intent and let the team do the rest. That's
Yep.
awesome. I love it. I mean, I'm learning so much today myself, and I hope our, listeners, hear this and get all these tidbits. Very, very valuable. Um, so I feel like this is building a team that already you have in place. The biggest challenge I see is when it comes to retention, when it comes to making sure you're hiring the right folks for your team. How do you, as a leader in law enforcement, pick the right person for your team? Do you even get a chance to pick the right person who could be the perfect fit for your team? How does it work, and how do you kind of induct them into this world of team and engagement and collaboration? What do you personally do, and are there any say protocols from an overall department?
Sure. I think it's a great question. I'll share with you kind of our hiring philosophy at the Mountain View Police Department when I was there. Um, you obviously, when you're hiring someone and you're listening to the interview, you're clearly listening for, I think, two different things. One is technical ability. Like, do they check the boxes? Where they, do they have the right education? But the second part of that, and here's the magic, is you're also listening for life experience. And if I use the example of, we're just going to make a giant pot of stew, what does this person bring to this equation ingredient wise that won't make it so bland that it's just part of the overall organization? If you want to create a vibrant team or organization, you want some spice, you want some different, ingredients, right? And
Agree.
as a leader, you're also going, what do I need? What am I lacking? And I know for us, you also have to talk about the onboarding process. For us, it's called the Police Academy. And where we fall short is sometimes we hire for all this diversity of background, and they come and we send them to a police academy, and they're punished for being different. They're punished for being independent thinkers, right? So for a private sector, you have to ask yourself, as they go through the hiring process, whether it's an HR presentation or the culture presentation, are they either encouraged to be themselves, their life experience, or are they stifled and they kind of get this impression like, oh, I probably shouldn't say something because the company culture does not really promote that, right? So those are big takeaways for leaders in the room, because then they can either actively just get some of the best ideas. And I'll give you an example of COVID. When COVID hit the police department, we formed what's called an innovation team. It was all on Zoom, and what we did, and it was kind of similar to the book club, we said, no one here is any better or worse. We come to this really big problem, global problem. We have to figure out a way through it. But I know somewhere in this room, someone has the right idea. And a few of our folks, I don't know if you've heard of the Stanford LEAD program, the design thinking.
Yes.
So a few of our captains had been indoctrinated and had gone through this. So they actually took us through this process to attack COVID and our response to it by not thinking as officers or law enforcement, but as thinking just everyone in this room has something to contribute. So how do we, add that? And it's really interesting to take an outside of the box thought to try to tackle a problem, because I think most of your audience will probably agree, as you've taken on the challenges of whatever industry they're in, you have your traditional thinking and way to get through it, but really innovation in Silicon Valley is what really takes people to the next level.
True. True. Awesome. I think this is great food for thought for all of us. Yesterday you taught me a term which I have been used to as soft skills, and you said you guys call it human skills. When I personally interview, or I have interviewed people, more than technical skills, I look for the aptitude, I look for human skills. And I wish everyone should call it human skills now and not soft skills. Sounds so much better. And how do you draw a balance? Is it for you a 50-50 that you have to have, this percentage of human skills that will check the box, or this percentage of technical, or if you have, say, a 60-40, it's still okay? How do you guys, or is there any ratio that is needed, or not at all? How do you look at a
Huh.
candidate when you pull them into a team?
I almost want to say it's like the ratio would be a 100-100, because um, and I'll use the example of a car stop. If an officer walked up to you, you get pulled over, it's already a tense situation, and they have no human skills, no, like, their voice and tone is just deadpan. I mean, that creates a very uncomfortable interaction. Whereas if an officer walks up to you and says, "Hi, how you doing? I know this is kind of a stressful situation, but here's the reason why I stopped you," and they're just warm, right? I'm not saying soft, but they're another pleasant human to talk to. Makes a huge difference. Now let's take that example of, human skills in a corporate environment. Here's a unfortunate thing, and we were talking about this yesterday. In our education system, kids are taught academics. They're taught all the core, things we need to know growing up, but we don't teach them human skills. We don't, and even in the college setting, we don't have a class on here's how to have a difficult conversation with an employee who's not really cutting it, right? So we have two options when it comes time for performance evaluations. And if you take the person who doesn't have human skills, they probably have not had those difficult conversations with the employee leading up to the evaluation. So there's probably stuff in the evaluation that the employee is surprised at. What's the number one rule? They should never be surprised by something they read in their evaluation, right?
Yes.
And they drop it on their desk and they turn and run. Versus someone who has been given the tools on how to have those uncomfortable conversations. You say, "Look, we've talked about this before, but I want you to know I'm telling you this because I care about you and I care about your career here. So here's the stuff I really need you to focus on," right? Surprisingly, regardless of the sector, we don't teach those skills. We kind of hope that the people we hire and promote just have them. But imagine a world where your company corporate structure or your company culture was every time someone got promoted, in addition to sending them to whatever management classes they have to get sent to, they're actually taught or mentored on. And it's so important in our culture that we have these conversations, and you have the skill to be able to deliver bad news, or you have the skill to care deeply for your team. And everyone on the team should feel cared for, right? And here's X, Y, and Z and how we get there. I don't think most of our workplace environments include that, but the ones that do, you can tell because people feel valued. People will go above and beyond. And in this day and age, it's so difficult, right? Because loyalty in companies and the why we do what we do. If it's just to get a paycheck, it's a terrible existence to want that. I want to create a world where people work in these teams, they work in our police departments and our sheriff's offices because, one, they want to make a difference in the world, right? That's a huge why for us. And we want to intersect with people sometimes at the worst part of their lives and turn it for the better, right? So that's our why. And I think, in the corporate world, you can think of similar reasons, right? I think the example Simon Sinek has used in the past is the difference between Apple and Microsoft, right? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
and done a TED talk where he talks about, Microsoft put out almost a better product. The initial, I can't remember, I think it was called the Zune.
Mm-hmm.
And then he talked to Apple employees. They're like, oh yeah, well, that doesn't matter. I mean, it's probably a better product, but we want to change the world, right? It's a totally different mindset. And I think that's the opportunity that leaders have, is we sit in those positions where we can affect where where on the horizon we're looking, and point our employees and our teams in that direction.
I mean, beautiful words. So many takeaways, but something that really stuck with me is what is very close to my heart personally, and that's why I started Pointerz, is hey, we never train or teach our kids or people who come into corporate or any kind of job any human skills. Somehow there's an expectation. You already have them, and no one takes time to actually worry about those. Every time I have seen trainings happen in corporate, it's all related to technical skills, always. What is it that you are doing to move the product to the next level? And that's what we will train you on, whether it's coding, whether it's, some technical or financial, some kind of, training that is totally 100% related to a technical skill that you should actually acquire or you should already possess. So you thinking on that terms kind of in my mind makes me feel really happy for two reasons. One, it's an endorsement that we are on the right track in terms of how we are building a product, but at the same time that great leaders are thinking on those lines, that this is an important thing for our future generations. And I think it's a big, big ingredient for a tasty stew, right? A successful team and a team that is sustainable and can grow in every aspect, like a 360-degree growth of a team member is what is important. So amazing. So all great stuff. Now let's talk about some challenges. It won't be fair if I talk about all things rosy and not talk about challenges and some stories you can share where you faced resistance, or people were not happy, or anything that could tell us uh, these could be the roadblocks on your journey of leadership, or on this journey of creating this amazing team. What can you share with our audience?
There's a saying in policing, and I think it translates actually, is there's two truths for all police officers. One, they hate things the way they are, and two, they hate change, right? And so I think that's more of a
Dichotomy, huh?
yeah, it's kind of more of an opinion statement on humanity, because I think it's all true. No one likes change, right? And so
Yeah.
uh, it's difficult sometimes to move people mentally, emotionally, socially, to accept that there's change. And this goes back to growth mindset, growth versus fixed mindset,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
I'm laughing because I remember just seeing in third grade homework that they're actually teaching our kids that. So I am happy about
Nice.
that. But it's true, and if you're trying to bring about change and you're not hitting any roadblocks, you're probably not making any change, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm reminded of a book that I read by Marty Linsky. It's called Leadership on the Line. And he has a quote in there, is that leadership is about disappointing people at the rate they can absorb.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think a true measure of a really great leader is the ability to make the change, have the courage to make the change, and the following of people, but also have that antenna up to know, okay, I think that's about all that this team or this organization can manage right now, and to back off a little bit, right? And so, in our line of work, we work a lot with the police unions, with different work groups, and really, it's sometimes of pushing change, but to the point where it's like, okay, anymore, and it's not going to be productive, right? And so, a lot of the success from that comes through interpersonal relationships too. And so that takes you down the road of building trust, that people will trust you, that as a leader, okay, I really don't like this, but I'm willing to take a chance because I trusted you before on whatever, and I can feel deep down that this is what, you have the best interests. I think as leaders, the default setting a lot of times is to describe what we want to do. We don't focus enough time on the why and the how, right? Like
Mhm.
how we're going to do this matters, because in our line of work, we talk about how we provide service is the game changer between what makes a difference between our sheriff's office and, fill in the blank police department somewhere else in the county. And then as the why part is, I think it's as a leader, wherever you are, I'm talking to listeners now, wherever you are in an organization, you should be able to sit down and go, why are we doing what we're doing? And if people don't have at least kind of a similar response, then that's your first clue. Like, okay, we probably should define our why before we get to, because otherwise you're just that widget factory that's putting out stuff, and that's kind of that miserable existence.
Amazing. So are you saying why is going to help you align the team, and
Yes.
then how is going to become much more, easier, right?
Yes.
And then your goal
Yeah.
will be achieved,
Yeah.
no matter what.
Yeah. If you look at any company's marketing or whatever, if their brochures are telling you what they put out, that's kind of a golf clap. That's like, okay, that's nice. The really transformative, I'm thinking of Apple again, right? When they market, they're marketing their why, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's like,
Mm-hmm.
and you go back to that, the if you think of all the commercials you've seen, so that's what I kind of throw out to your audience is um, the why is the differentiator. And when everything, I think in a post-COVID world, we would all agree just the workforce has changed. People kind of go to work, but they not necessarily have the purpose, or they move around from job to job all the time. And we see that in our line of work too. It used to be that you came into a police department and you stayed for a career. Now it's like 2 to 3 years and they're off to the next thing. So to me, the game changer for like employee retention and loyalty is that why. Like people want to feel that they are part of something that's purposeful, right? And it should be secondary. They get a great paycheck from it. That's awesome. But I think we all know, you can have these incentives for, hiring bonuses, and they come on. At best, you might get 2 to 3 years out of somebody if they came for that reason. But if your work environment is such that that why is so clear, and it's like I'm
Mm-hmm.
here for the why, and I love the fact that I get to be aligned alongside people that feel the same way, that's incredibly powerful. You can pretty much conquer any issue or problem, or and come out with some pretty incredible byproducts as a result.
I love it. I love it. It kind of reminds me of being purpose driven.
Mm,
And as long as you all have the same purpose, it's going to be so much easier to work
right.
together
Yep.
and get things done.
Mm.
Awesome. I mean, I can go on forever with this conversation, but not
Uh,
possible. But next podcast for sure. So as we wrap up our conversation, what would you say could be the key takeaways that you're gonna tell our listeners to keep always in their mind, like in the back burner, right? On the back
mm,
burner, in their
mm.
mind, um, whether it's in the law enforcement or in the corporate world. What are
Right.
the three things or four things that you will emphasize on?
I think everybody is a leader, whether you have the positional authority or not. And I equate leadership with influence. So if you work in a team environment, you have influence. You
Mm-hmm.
either influence positively, you might influence negatively, or you might kind of just be the lemming in the middle that just kind of goes side to side. But do a little bit of soul searching and find out where you are in that kind of scale. And then ask yourself, if you don't like the work environment you're in, what are you doing about it? Right. Maybe second is, some people in the audience might ask, well, what if I work for a boss that doesn't buy into any of this? Then
Mm-hmm.
I would tell you, be the leader that you wish you had. Right. And what's going to happen in that dynamic is, um, and this goes back to our earlier discussion of, the law of diffusion of innovation, is find those like-minded early adopter innovators in your team environment and band together and really just talk about that, and find joy in the fact that now you have someone else, find your tribe, and create this new environment that you wish you had. And I guarantee you, management will take notice, because your productivity will probably go through the roof. and they're going to recognize like there's something special about this team, and then someone on this team or not, or all of them are ended up getting promoted. Third, let's say you get promoted. Really understand that the more you are vulnerable and the more that you can share your own trials and tribulations and trip ups with that team, that makes it okay. And you're going to actually take that team to the next level because your role as a leader is to be that safety net. When things go wrong, you raise your hand and go, hey, that's on me. But when things go right, everyone there on that team gets that credit. And that just sets you up for the next awesome accomplishment of what you're going to do. And really is, and I think this might be cliche, but it's really lifelong learning, I think, but learn from verticals and sectors that are outside of this world because like this discussion we're having here, right? You're having a discussion with someone in a world that has nothing to do with startups or tech, but yet we're talking about human insight and interaction, and there's so much to be learned, right? So take that and go, maybe you're in the tech sector. Well, go read something about government or read something about policing, even if you want. There's going to be takeaways, right? And the more that there's that kind of cross collaboration, you're going to grow as a human, you're going to grow as a leader, and there's a lot of opportunity because I'm pretty sure your competitor may not be doing that. They're competing with their own internal or and so the greatest of ideas always come from outside kind of that lane that you're in. And so there's opportunity for that.
Awesome. Great summary. And I feel like on this podcast, you kind of revealed the playbook of how to create stellar teams and how to be an awesome leader. And there's just so much for people to absorb from this podcast. Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your insights into leadership. It's been amazing. It's been a delight having this conversation. And now I'm craving for so much more. But I feel like this is a great way to close 2023 with this podcast. And God willing, we'll have so many more with you because I do want to get into the details of the curve. What else is curve planning on doing next year? You guys' vision, collaboration with private sector or any corporates, and I'm sure with Simon Sinek involved there's going to be a lot of overlap,
Right.
so a lot of stuff to look forward to. Amazing. Thank you so much, Chris.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be on your show.
Awesome. And to our listeners, thank you so much for joining us for this amazing episode of the Inclusive Insights. Chris's profile is going to be in the description. Please go and read through the curve, their passion, and what the purpose of the organization is. I highly, highly encourage and recommend it. And if you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to subscribe for more insightful discussions. Until next time, lead with inspiration and purpose. Thank you.